All right, so a few days ago, I made a video about Northwestern's weird stadium predicament, and seems people were very interested in it. Kind of surprised me, but no, I do agree. It is kind of just a weird situation, but this is really a niche topic, and looking into it, I wanted to go through Northwestern's 2024 schedule and kind of predict where I think they'll be playing based off of a lot of these home games. And then we're also going to be talking about the ACC finally releasing their schedule. How many teams do I think the ACC is going to get into the playoff? I will reveal that towards the end. But let's take a look at this Northwestern's 2024 football schedule. Remember the original article I talked about, that Northwestern possibly playing at Martin Stadium, which is like their lacrosse stadium that only has a capacity of 2,000. Soldier Field could be an option, Wrigley Field, and then SeatGeek Stadium. That is a soccer stadium that has the capacity of around 20K. That's where I think they probably will be playing their first 5 home games. You can see they've got Miami of Ohio, they've got Duke and Eastern Illinois. Those games not very popular in terms of the attendance, at least we wouldn't expect, with Ryan Field being demolished and the new one going up, and that's going to be a total construction site. The next 2 years, Northwestern, they're going to need a place to play. So I would say those first 3 games, late August, early September, because the Cubs are still going to be playing at Wrigley Field, because, it just doesn't seem likely that they would do Soldier Field. I do think they could play those games at the soccer stadium, although that schedule might overlap as well. If the soccer stadium is unavailable, you would have to think it would be Martin Stadium with possibly maybe some expanded seats, although that's ridiculous. You can't really play there, at least you wouldn't think. This is Big Ten football, but those 3 games, there's going to be very little attendance either way. I just kind of want to paint the picture, though. Miami of Ohio at Northwestern, a noon game that starts at Soldier Field. Imagine the attendance issues. They would have like 90% of the stadium closed. Illinois State at Northwestern at Soldier Field. It's a grotesque idea. And then you can see they've got a road game. They get Indiana at home. I would also, say they're probably going to be playing that at SeatGeek Stadium. At Maryland, they get Wisconsin at home. That's when you could maybe think that they would start transitioning to possibly Wrigley Field, with the Cubs possibly being out of it. But it's hard because the Cubs theoretically could make the playoffs. That would be like the NLDS at that point, though, later in October. Yeah, I mean, they could do that. And then moving on past the Cubs season, you do have Ohio State coming to Northwestern. They're not going to be playing at Ryan Field like it says. Will Ohio State, with that loaded defense, play at Wrigley, or will it be Soldier Field? That's interesting. I would love to see Ohio State football playing at Wrigley Field, selling out the place. It would be a raucous game. And obviously, you would expect Ohio State to easily beat Northwestern, but it's just kind of a cool, unique thing. And then they also have Illinois at home. Could that game also possibly be at Wrigley Field? You could be looking at Northwestern hosting the first 5 games at the soccer stadium and then transitioning to Wrigley Field for 3 games, or they could host the first 5 games at Soldier Field and then transition it. It just depends on the schedules and how they align. But very interesting situation with Northwestern homeless in 2024. And that Ohio State game, that's going to be circled. Imagine Ohio State and their fan base watching the Buckeyes at Wrigley Field. What a weird situation. It's not even a multi-purpose stadium anymore. It's very crammed in, but you would have to think, based on Wrigley Field, the Wrigleyville area, all the rooftop seats, they would all be filled up, and you could get a sellout there, and it would just be a kind of a unique quirk to think about, but we will see when it comes to Northwestern football. And then moving on to the ACC, they finally released their schedule for 2024. You can see this is the full schedule right here. They do have a week 0 matchup that is happening in Ireland, Georgia Tech, and FSU. So FSU's schedule is kind of random. They play week 0, and then week 1 they play on, I believe that's a Monday night, September 2nd. So they start in week 0 in Ireland, and then they play on a Monday night hosting Boston College. Not too sure about that matchup. They always have that Labor Day game, that ACC random matchup, and it always is kind of crappy. It just always seems boring. Remember when Clemson played a neutral site game against like Georgia Tech 2 years ago? And I don't know. I know Duke had the upset this past year against Clemson, but even that game was kind of boring, honestly. And then this game against Boston College obviously not expected to be very good. But FSU, they have 3 bye weeks this season. Wow. So they have a bye week that's week 2. Then they've got like 5 games, another bye week, 4 games, and then another bye week, and then 2 games after that. FSU has a very strange schedule. Everyone else will have 2 bye weeks, but if you play on week 0, you'll get 3 bye weeks. Oregon has something to where I thought Oregon was going to play an extra game, but I don't think that's happening anymore. It's a very strange idea because Oregon originally was going to play during week 0 and then just have 2 bye weeks instead of 3. But either way, that's just the schedule there. And then this is actually SMU's schedule. SMU's a really interesting team going into 2024. If Preston Stone comes back healthy, joining the ACC, you would think a lot of winnable games, and their first 4 games are at home. If you can, BYU, it's a winnable game, but the Big 12 is just such a mosh pit. TCU at home, Florida State at home, at Louisville, at Stanford, SMU at Stanford. That's the new ACC. It makes complete sense. It really does. And then this is their Thursday, Friday specialty games. You can see week 1, they've got a bunch of them. I guess the most intriguing one would be North Carolina traveling to Minnesota. Both of those programs kind of at an impasse right now. North Carolina losing Drake May. Minnesota, the PJ Fleck, magic has kind of died down there. And then there you can see some of the other games going. These are the Thursday games, week 8, week 9, and week 13. Boston College at Virginia Tech, Syracuse at Pittsburgh, NC State at Georgia Tech. I will say I've heard a lot of hype surrounding NC State. NC State might be a preseason top 25 team. We will see, but there is some, especially being in the ACC, if NC State can rack up some wins, maybe go 9-3. That's honestly what they're expected to do. And then the Friday games, you can see some of the Friday matchups. Stanford, TCU, that's a typical ACC game that everyone loves. And then you can see just other games, week 4, week 5. Any intriguing matchups there? Stanford at Syracuse. Yeah, the week 4 game. But I would say maybe FSU at Duke. Duke getting Malik Murphy in the portal from Texas. He was their backup quarterback. Could be interesting. Other than that, Cal at Wake Forest in the snow in November. Oh my goodness, it's just great. And when it comes to my prediction on how many teams I think will make the playoff from the ACC, let's be honest, this conference is very likely only getting 1 team in. I know maybe they get 2, but it's just, there's a lot of mediocre teams in the ACC, that's what I'll say. But either way, that's just the ACC schedule. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about the potential of Ohio State playing at Wrigley Field with this weird situation. The way the schedule works out, you wouldn't expect Northwestern to play their first 5 home games at Wrigley because it could conflict with the MLB schedule, and you're not going to want to rip up fields multiple times, especially with Wrigley, the natural grass. I'm guessing they're going to play their first 5 games either at Soldier Field or at SeatGeek Stadium, the soccer stadium, and then possibly play their final 3 games or 1 or 2 games at Wrigley Field. They did play 1 game this past year at Wrigley Field against Iowa. And then I also saw some people saying, why are they doing this? They don't need a new stadium. Absolutely, they need a new stadium, especially with the situation surrounding the Big Ten, the conference getting really good, and the TV payouts are so lucrative. The idea that they would stay at Ryan Field, one of the worst Power 5 stadiums, if not the worst Power 5 stadium in college football, the place really can't be renovated the way it's built. So certainly they needed a new stadium, and they realized it, or else the Big Ten was going to be very angry with them, and that's why they're building their new state-of-the-art $800 million stadium that is coming. But either way, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.